Morning, everybody. Rachel, if you could just keep letting people in, really appreciate it. Wow, we're so excited for today. I'm so grateful that so many of you have been able to join us. I'm Dave Ford. I am the founder of the Ocean Plastic Leadership Network. So excited today to dive into our INC-5 sprint that we've been working on. It feels like since INC-4. So the goal of today's meeting is to really dig into the criteria, the harmonized safety criteria around alternatives to plastics. And Megan, could you drop the? I was okay, great. And just go through the agenda a little bit today. So very quickly, just kind of stage setting, letting you guys know a little bit about the OPLN. We're going to also do a program overview and talk about the public consultations. Our technical lead, Rachel Ryan, will lead you all through that. Our CEO, Marta Facina, is going to introduce the harmonized safety and sustainability criteria. If you see HSC, that is the acronym for harmonized safety and sustainability criteria. That's going to lead to this INC-5 negotiators brief. We are going to get into, we're so excited to have the Scientists Coalition and Tricia Farrelly on the call today, who are going to go through the science panel presentation and INC-5 non-paper draft insights and the importance of the essential use concept, and also review the harmonized safety and sustainability criteria. We'll have some opportunities for Q&A, and then we're going to have an incredible multi-stakeholder perspective on all this work that we've done with Carolyn DeRoche of Atlantic Packaging, Marcus Erickson of Five Gyres, Preeti Yang from Mars, and Derek Atkinson from Total Corbion Energies. We're so excited that John Warner is also here with us today, and he'll be diving in a little bit on his take on all of this. And if you could pull out of the screen, Megan, the slides. I just want to tell you a little bit about the OPLN and about the type of work that we do, and about the way that we approach some of the most difficult topics in the circularity ecosystem, specifically related to the treaty, but and beyond. We are a neutral secretariat, so we do not take advocacy positions. So the work that we're showing today is, there's been so much brain power that has been fed into it from really across the entire ecosystem. We just want to very clearly delineate that we are a secretariat. We do not advocate, but we do work with organizations all across this entire ecosystem. So we're really, really excited to dig into it. So Megan, if you could bring the slides back up. So this work was all started at a kickoff meeting that we did in Charlotte, North Carolina, earlier this year with our incredible gracious host, Atlantic Packaging. And we had organizations that you see below from across the entire ecosystem. We had scientists, we had consumer packaged good companies, we had an array of materials companies that were represented, and NGOs from really across the spectrum. And all of this brain power came together to really kick us off. And there's been a ton of work that's happened since then that we're going to get into. Next slide, please. So May 28th, this is where, this is the brain trust that got together. We want to thank everyone that was able to come to Charlotte, and everyone, a few folks that were able to beam into Charlotte as well to really bring this together. And again, there's a tremendous amount of brain power and a lot of different POVs, a lot of different perspectives. And, we're firm believers that tension equals progress. And from the beginning, we really feel like, we've been working together collectively to shape this effort, and to really kick off the conversation inside of the Global Plastics Treaty discussions around safety and sustainability criteria and in alternatives to plastics. Next slide. And we've had so much, just so much lean in, from stakeholders all across the ecosystem. have asked for more, and we are really excited to announce today that we are going to launch a continuation to this program. It's going to be a sub-network of the OPLN that's called the Alternatives to Plastics Leadership Network. And the mission is to advance development and access to safe and sustainable plastic alternatives, non-plastic substitutes, including their supportive systems, services, and technologies. We are going to do an in-person convening. It's highly likely it's going to be in June this year, and highly likely it's going to be in Burlington, Vermont. And we're also going to do 6 plenary sessions and ideation sessions and working groups throughout the year. So for all of you that were a part of this effort in 2024, we're so excited to invite you to continue this work with us, as we'll be the neutral secretariat in the same way and fashion in 2025. More to come on all of the above. And I am really excited to introduce our technical programs lead, Rachel Ryan, who's going to walk us through the review process and general overview.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I know we have people around the world here. My name is Rachel Ryan. Thank you for the introduction, Dave. I am the technical programs lead here at OPLN. I've been supporting this process, and many of you may have seen my name in your inboxes as we've collected feedback throughout the process and since the last plenary. Again, many of you may have heard some of this in the kickoff session or participated in the previous plenaries, but to set the stage with the review of the goal, this whole program's goal is to develop a science-based set of safety and sustainability criteria across 4 main key pillars: safety, environment, sociocultural, and economic. And these will enable effective screening of plastic alternatives, and non-plastic substitutes. So the goal here really is to be material agnostic. This is all in movement towards Busan for INC-5. The negotiators brief, which many of you have reviewed, intends to equip the negotiators with a harmonized framework and language critical for screening the safety and sustainability of any material to transition systems and de-risk innovation. If you've attended multiple plenaries, you also will know that this process has included a lot of research, very intensive feedback rounds, and it's also evolved as we learned more about the text under consideration in Busan, and as we continue to incorporate feedback. You'll hear more from colleagues and other speakers about the evolution, but before I hand it to everyone else, I want to summarize the program's process for context and the timeline so you can really come to understand how fast we've been moving. So I won't read all of this, but just as an overview, in July, we formed the working group, as Dave described, and we conducted an initial ideation session on the guiding principles. Through August, we've conducted additional rounds of review and developed and reviewed the safety criteria, which was presented in the mid-August plenary. We also, during this time, developed and reviewed the environmental criteria and the sociocultural criteria. In September, we held the second plenary to share the status of the document ahead of multi-stakeholder consultations, and also had intensive working and consultation sessions with our advisors and our scientists. So during this period, we shared the document with key stakeholders, those that requested the document. This resulted in significant volume of feedback, as I've mentioned, from private stakeholders, public sector experts, organizations across material value chains. And then throughout November, we've continued this consultation and updating process. We're holding this plenary today, and we'll be finalizing the document, and then we'll be socializing it in Busan. If there are updates necessary after Busan, we will hold consultations with advisors and scientists and any other stakeholders relevant, and we'll complete this phase of the program with a final document following the INC-5. So we want to sincerely thank the contributors to this, and I'll hand it off to Dave to introduce our core members.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel. We're just very quickly want to extend our deep thanks to the independent scientist panel today from the all from the Scientist Coalition. You know, much of this effort was born out of conversations with the Scientist Coalition at INC-4 in Ottawa. So Dr. Sia Farrelly, Dr. Bethany Carney Amroth, Dr. Jane Monk, Dr. Olga Pantos, Dr. Maria Fernandez, and Dr. Richard Thompson. I believe at the end of that session that they led in Ottawa, Dr. Thompson said that what we need here is a multi-stakeholder coalition to take this on. And we're just so humbled and honored to have been able to answer that call through this effort. So thank you so much. Next slide. Really grateful for our program advisors, for the WWF, our friend Aaron Simon, Jess Zuner, Alex Grabowski. WWF has been a huge supporter of OPLN since inception, so we're really grateful for all of your help on this effort. Dr. John Warner, Sean Sutherland, Rose Yepsen of BPI, and of course, really grateful to UNEP and Laurent Milad Canals. Thank you so much for all of your help and support throughout this journey. And then lastly, slide, please. Want to thank our private sector reviewers, our colleagues at Mars and Futurama, NatureWorks, Mondelez, Ball, Deepest Shell Works, PepsiCo, Atlantic Packaging, and then Total Energies, Corbion. Thank you all so much. Again, this is a massive effort, and we're just so grateful for so many different leaders coming together to make this happen. And next slide. I'm very excited to dig into the meat of what we're doing here. And our CEO, I want to introduce our CEO, Marta Facina, who's going to give an overview of the Harmonized Safety and Sustainability Criteria for Products and Systems. Marta, take it away. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. Yeah, we'll get right to it. So we're going to get started with our overview. We can move to the next slide. So as our team has already mentioned, OPLN, supported by multi-stakeholder advisory and consultations, developed this INC-5 brief for harmonized safety and sustainability criteria. So this document specifically calls negotiators to mandate the development of harmonized safety and sustainability criteria within the international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. So you're going to learn more about what the HSCs are, but in short, there are a comprehensive set of science-based principles for assessments of safety and sustainability of different products and systems, and that includes conventional plastics, plastic alternatives, and non-plastic substitute, and their associated chemicals of concern, as well as supportive systems, services, technologies that we're going to be collectively referring to as products and systems moving forward. Otherwise, this is going to take 3 hours. So let me just get right to it. Next slide, please. So first things first. So the reason why we came together is to really understand what the HSCs could bring forward for the treaty agreement. So first, the HSCs enable opportunity to establish safety and sustainability baselines for transparency, monitoring, and reporting. They're also very useful to develop a pathway to identify safer and more sustainable alternatives and substitute, considering the full life cycle of plastics and products. They can also inform in the future safe and sustainable practices throughout the entire life cycle and encourage public and private partnerships to support phase-outs or restrictions of non-essential, unsafe, or unsustainable products. And we believe that these type of criteria and its application should be overseen by an independent scientific, technical, and socioeconomic body. So this presentation is very much a call for future development with some proposed approaches to development based on the stakeholder consultations we've held so far. So let's move to the next slide, please. So first things first, so OPLN, as we've mentioned, we're a neutral convener. So we very much focus on looking on 2 areas of alignment and understanding. So what we've understood by running these consultations is that In general, the multi-stakeholder community agrees that lack of available, structured, and comparable data on safety and sustainability of products and systems is hindering transition up the way security. And that is a huge opportunity for the treaty to support transparency, monitoring, and reporting. Next slide, please. So some of the data limitations that came forward for this process are, for example, safety data, so information on both likelihood of risk as well as hazards, such as persistence and toxicities, considering both human health and environmental health. Life cycle data, so consistent data on sourcing, raw extraction, down to socioeconomic impacts, climate resilience, and habitat fragmentation that can feed into, enrich, and support existing methodologies and assessments out there, for example, LCA. Scalability and application data. So insights into trade-offs and indirect effects of systems, both at large and a small scale, considering various conditions globally and nationally. And then capacity data. So very much context-specific technical research capacity, financial capacity at both regional and national level, as we obviously do understand the disparities in potential applications of what safe and sustainable may mean in one place and the other. Let's move to the next. So in terms of the scope of our HSC criteria, so we've been looking at both safety and sustainability criteria. By safety criteria, we very much mean human and environmental health combined together, and sustainability criteria are comprised of environment, economic, and sociocultural considerations. Throughout this process, we've analyzed over 100 different indicators and considerations, and we've been mapping this across over 50, I'd say, main policy, like multilateral agreements, frameworks out there. And we very much looked deeply at what is very much aligned and what can help to support the existing legislations in place and how we can aggregate and organize some of that data. And it is rather a large task. So we consider this very much a work in progress and a proposed first layer of proposed approach. We've also, through this process, looked at the essential use pathway. And our team here, including Tricia Furley, will discuss that in depth later in the presentation today, so stay tuned for that component as well. But this is very much an overview of kind of the key areas and clusters that we've considered. We can move to the next slide, please. So it's very important to note here that the criteria are material agnostic, and it's done on purpose to offer consistency and predictability in assessments that producers undertake to understand the safety and sustainability of plastic alternatives and non-plastic substitutes. But however, for the sake of large-scale understanding, we're looking at products and systems of biospheres, so products that can be circulated through biological processes, as well as technosphere, so products that can be circulated through technological processes. Next slide, please. So we're going to dive into the safety criteria now. So throughout our process, we've looked at many different proposals around human health and safety that are emerging in regards to the treaty on plastic pollution. And we have moved forward with clusters inspired and considered by the screening approach within the EU proposal for Annex A to the instrument, which addresses specifically chemicals and groups of chemicals of concern in plastic and plastic products. So like I've mentioned earlier, these are material agnostic, but we believe that through the stakeholder consultations, that those clusters are kind of the base our base pillars for further development and assessment of human and environmental health. So we look at basically CMRs, so carcinogenic, mutagenic, and reprotoxic. So we can discuss that in a second, but it's very much talking about what long-term risks and impacts products can have on our health. Then we look at toxicity, and that means toxicity of organs, also chronic effects, as well as in environment. It can be chemical toxicity and morphotype toxicity. So morphotype toxicity, for example, refers to the toxicity of shape. So there's a little bit of inconsistency in current terminology around what that means. So we wanted to address it from the beginning, and we'll have our advisors to dive deeper into safety criteria shortly. So stay tuned for that part. Next slide, please. So right now we are looking at 16 different considerations for criteria we actually took originally, and we're doing this in order to kind of present part of our processes here to all of you, so you have understanding of kind of a wider scope. So the existing brief is very much a condensed version of our original research. And this 16 indicator areas of hazard, as well as risk, but in many cases hazards, are described here for those clusters. And we can move to the next slide, please. And that brings us to our human health and environmental health criteria. So we were able to identify 4 specific criteria that very much summarize the overall large-scale effects and issues with safety and products and systems that are currently circulated in the market, as well as those that may be entering the market without a full assessment and evaluation. And we'll get to risk and hazard in a second, but I do want to mention the 4 core principles: that products and systems should not contain substances that increase the risk of cancer, cause genetic damage, or harm reproductive health, including fetal or embryo development. Products and systems should not harm the function or structure of vital organs, including lungs, nervous system, liver, or skin, nor disrupt the body's microbiome. And then on the environmental health, products and systems should not persist in the body or environment, nor accumulate in organisms over time, and should not present hazards of entrapment, entanglement, or indigestion, preventing harm or fatalities among wildlife. And this very much relates to the toxicity of shape that has been described earlier. In large scale of things, we also advise that the human health criteria are also applied to environmental health as well. And that is also part of the advice or recommendations we've received from multi-stakeholder consultations. But like I said, we're trying to condense here a very complex issue. So expect this to continuously be evolving. But these seem to be, from the current perspective, the base layers of what should be considered in the scope of safety. And as you can see below, we've also started working on specific indicators for considerations, and we have defined alignment with existing policy frameworks out there. So as you can see, EU REACH regulations or the persistent organic pollutants, POP, Stockholm Convention is very much in alignment with the criteria that are being proposed and moved forward here. And we can move to the next slide, please. So one of the key area of contention that we run into in this process has been around the discussion of hazard and risk approach to evaluation of products and systems. And there seems to be very much a very deep disconnect on that among the stakeholder groups. And currently, our safety criteria do prioritize addressing universal hazards to human and environmental health. However, we also identify that the HSC could be adopting a phased approach to risk assessment and management that is supported by hazard identification in order to have a comprehensive overview of the products and systems that are already circulated in the marketplace versus those that might be entering the market. And that leads me to my next slide. The major challenge we found in evaluating products and system safety is the lack of comprehensive data. And again, it leads us to our original point. We do not have the data to assess hazards for the products entering the markets, and we, in many cases, don't have enough data that we all can agree on, on risks or likelihood of risks of products that are currently circulated. And the treaty provides a unique opportunity to mandate development of such testing and regulate safety and sustainability data development, so that the practices of companies producing, sourcing, marketing products and systems are very much tied to the data monitoring regulations and testing of their products. And that is an opportunity for the HSC criteria to play a role in helping to harmonize some of those viewpoints out there. Next slide, please. Now we're diving into sustainability criteria. So there has not been any easy criteria that we've been looking at over the course of this process in terms of the sustainability criteria. Our stakeholders in consultations have acknowledged very much the existing products assessments, for example, LCA, SLCA, USTOX, as powerful tools, but their effectiveness may be now constrained again by inconsistent data, lack of data, or lack of standardized parameters, and in some ways, lack of trust and transparency, where suppliers may hesitate to share some of the data for the fear of losing competitiveness, for example. So this has been an area that we have definitely run into quite a bit in the process of developing these criteria. So in a sense, the HSC criteria and having a harmonized criteria creates an opportunity for products and assessments such as LCA to be used consistently, for the data to be available and transparent to assess product alternatives, and also to provide clarity on the elements that maybe are not yet captured in such assessments in a consistent way. So then they could be added or enriched in an existing data framework or monitoring systems. We can move to the next slide, please. So our existing proposed approach is very much looking at life cycle waste generation leakage, resource efficiency, pollution along the full life cycle, chemical and morphotype toxicity, which has already been addressed in safety criteria, nature resource conservation, biodiversity loss, emissions, and climate resilience. So it is also very important here in the context of the treaty to mention that it's going to be essential to be able to incorporate national context and research capacities within the criteria. And we believe that should include capabilities of local waste management systems, for example, to really understand how new potential safe and sustainable products or not can really perform in a particular market, in a particular circumstance, as well as have a deeper and broader consideration of spatial and ecological effects. So that includes the LCA representation, but it also really dives into the topics of ecosystem connectivity, biodiversity, habitat fragmentation. So again, in many cases, maybe the tests aren't fully developed yet, but it is an area that should be recognized and further worked on. And I think that's what the criteria can offer over time, is to show and present some of these gaps. And we can move to the next slide. So right now we're looking also at the overview of 3 principles here that we have identified for environment, specifically environmental criteria throughout this process. As you can imagine, originally we started with 16 or 17 considerations for this, typically also mapped to alignment with existing policy frameworks. And in this case specifically, we're looking at products and systems that should be resource efficient throughout their entire life cycle, minimizing non-renewable energy use, reducing land impact, and conserving their water footprint. So we obviously acknowledge that a lot of this is already in many ways covered by, for example, LCA tools out there. Natural resource conservation, and that's another area that we've been addressing through our criteria. And in that sense, the criteria should prioritize the protection of ozone as well as biotic and abiotic resources to prevent depletion and support diversity, ecosystems, and health resilience. And last but not least, we look at pollution, waste, and leakage across life cycle. So there's quite a bit of discussions right now around how leakage is tracked. And that is also an area that stakeholders have brought into our consideration during this process on how we can really tap into those gaps around leakage. And those leakages include macro, micro, nano pollution and particles out there. And how can we really protect air, water, soil, and wildlife and understand the impact of that leakage over time. And that can lead us to our next page. So to complement the environmental criteria in the HSC format, we're looking at specifically inclusion of sociocultural and economic considerations as well. And it is also an opportunity to develop science-based indicators for both quantitative and qualitative indicators for sociocultural impact, where in many ways it has been harder to measure for some, or maybe there has not been enough of science-based indicators that are developed around this area that could really help tracking that impact at scale. So our criteria are very much looking at that, and that will be needed to be further developed with practical implementation and participation of key representatives, including Indigenous people and other rights holders, frontline, fence-line communities, waste pickers, women, and youth in alignment with the Just Transition Action Program. So what we're going to present is also, as all of it, a draft and work in progress, but we do want to bring this forward as a organized framework of thought. Next slide, please. So here right now, we're looking at some of the sociocultural criteria and some of the indicators for considerations that we have brought forward that we believe have the potential for being turned into a science-based indicators that can be tracked over time for different data sources. And we're looking at social equity and justice, frontline, fence line, and Indigenous group support, just transition, and cultural impact. Those are key areas. And it's also worth mentioning that there are existing tools out there naturally, and we know that there's also LCA that is addressing a lot of these issues as well. But like I mentioned earlier, HSCs should be serving over time to address the gaps as they emerge, the gaps that we may not be able to foresee with the evolution of technologies and societies in the future. And we believe that there should be a mechanism that continuously evaluates that. We can move to the next slide, please. In terms of economic criteria, again, we're looking at affordability and accessibility, scalability, and employment and labor market impact. As you can see, there are some of the indicators already listed here. This is obviously very much a core part of the criteria, is making sure that we have economic criteria and that are brought forward to complement the other three already presented. And that will complete the first layer of our criteria review that will be pending your future comments. And so let's get to that in a second. Next slide, please. And now a practical application for this, because this is quite a lot of content, as you can all see, and I'm sure you agree, with the multi-stakeholder groups that we have met and discussed. they address the opportunity within the treaty to identify which products and systems are currently essential and where there is a lack of available safe and sustainable options, and what is needed to support a just transition away from problematic plastics. So we've developed a little pathway assessment for HSC to really present different outcomes of rule-outs, specifically for products and systems that contain chemicals of concern. So it doesn't necessarily apply to all products, but specifically for those most problematic ones, we should be looking at that in a very organized manner. And it seems that member states across board will be looking very much for guidance in dealing with that post INC-5. So let's look at the next slide, please. So this is our pathway assessment. So the first question we are really asking, looking at the pathway assessment for identifying safe and sustainable products is the product use or function essential? So by essential use, and we means that products are deemed essential for health, safety, or critical societal functions, and when no safer alternatives are available. And like I mentioned earlier, this should very much be applied to problematic products and problematic plastics. This scenario really presents us, and I'll send you over a high resolution version because I feel like we have a little bit hard time here. But there are a few scenarios here that we're really analyzing. Scenario A is that where there are no available alternatives for essential use products. Scenario B is where we can leverage HSC to identify and continuously identify safe and sustainable alternatives. And scenario C, where non-essential non-essentials are basically deemed products are deemed as non-essential and are being phased out, or B, they are being eliminated or reduced in a design phase. So those are some of the options. So the current suggestion, as you can see here, is to first focus on safety assessment criteria and rule out products that are identified as unsafe to human or environmental health, and that should be #1 priority. And then through our current consultation program. B, for many of those products, we will probably not have sufficient science-based evidence of their safety, and therefore there should be further evaluated. And that leads us to another layer of evaluation, including environmental, sociocultural, and economic assessment criteria. However, if the products are unable to present neither safety nor sustainability data that's comprehensive, then there should not be considered as alternatives. And in a nutshell, that is the really big takeaway from this graph, okay, that is very complex. But it takes us through a lot of questions that we should be asking. But the point is, if there's no transparency and disclosure, then it cannot be considered a safe and sustainable alternative. And what we should be driving forward with is making sure that the data frameworks are available so that the best solutions can come forward to help transition to the safe and sustainable, regenerative, restorative, circular economies that we're looking to support, and that pose no risk to human and environmental health. And those simple principles in terms of order and prioritization and the rule out option for lack of data seems to us to be the most simplest way to articulate the very complex topic that we're encountering here through this process. And on that note, I'm finally done with my large presentation, and I will be handing it over to our speakers today and advisors to this program. And our first advisor here is John Warner, CEO of Technology Greenhouse. John, are you with us?
I am indeed. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
So thank you very much. This is obviously a super ambitious and important undertaking, and there's a lot of conflicting opinions and passions in such a difficult endeavor. So I just compliment everybody that's passionately engaged in this. The perspective that I want to just bring to this table is that imagine if everybody just decided they wanted these six sustainable technologies. People just refuse to have anything but a sustainable technology. The problem right now is how much do you think is choosing better options, and how much is we actually have to invent the new solutions? That ratio is really important, because if it's a decision, what are the things out there that are good? That's a very different situation than what are the things we need to invent. And in my opinion, I feel that the vast majority of materials right now still need to be invented. There are a lot of materials that are better than the things in commerce, but they're still not where we need to be. So it's important, and I think that this process is being very sensitive to this, that this is a process. You know, if we have a hazardous material in commerce and we don't have an alternative, but there's an alternative that's a little better, do we wait and have the more hazardous materials stay in commerce because the replacement just isn't good enough? Are we going to choose to allow hazardous things to stay on? So that, I think, is reflective in this decision, that the enemy of the excellent is the perfect. And this is a long process. We all know where we want to go, and we just need to get there. And so I love that we're looking at assays. Because we have so much of a history of regrettable substitution, saying ban this molecule, just invites regrettable substitutions. But if we say we want our replacement materials to do well on this assay, we want materials to do well on this assays, the researchers inventing it have an actionable criteria, and that will help us avoid regrettable substitution. So I compliment that hard work that's going on. Okay, here is the class of compounds, here are the assays, whether it's for health or for environment. That is just so fantastic. And then the concept of hazard and risk, again, the way I look at it, we always want to end at the end with all hazard being eliminated. But this is a journey. It's going to take years. And unfortunately, there's going to be a temporary time where we're going to have to assess the exposure and the risk. We just got to realize and agree to ourselves that that is a temporary solution. That if we're addressing risk by intended use, that's temporary until we come up with the better technology. So I think that's great. And then lastly, just again, this concept of the enemy of the excellent is the perfect, and the perfect doesn't exist. What we need to realize is that there is human suffering. In every moment that we don't introduce better technologies, we continue human suffering. And so if we insist on the perfect, we need to realize we're always letting some suffering continue because we don't think it's good enough. So we always need to be mindful of the impact of that decision. So thank you for the amazing work that everyone's doing here. I'm thrilled and so optimistic that this is going to lead to a future that we're all going to be proud of. So thank everybody, and thank you for including me in this to share with you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Right, our next speaker actually is here with us through recorded video because she's currently flying over some mountains. So let's give her 3 minutes to talk about toxicity.
Good day, everybody, and greetings from Plastic Waste Free World in Cologne, Germany. Lovely to be with you all. My name is Sian Sutherland, and I am co-founder of the Plastic Planet, the solutions platform Plastic Free. And also today, I'm really going to be speaking to you in my role as co-founder of the Plastic Health Council that represents many of the most eminent scientists who have decades of experience in the impact of plastic and its chemicals on human health. As we know, plastic is a mixture of chemicals. many of which are toxic to human health. It is not a material in its own right. We use 16,000 chemicals to give plastic its incredible properties. It's stretchy and thin or rigid and strong. It's a miracle material, but it's also irrefutably toxic to nature. Of those 16,000 chemicals, only 6% are globally regulated, and less than 4,000 have been tested for human safety. And of those chemicals tested, the majority are considered chemicals of extreme concern, irrefutably harmful to human health. Of course, if these chemicals are harmful to humans, then of course they're harmful to every other living organism on planet Earth. We have already lost 90% of the big fish of our oceans. We've lost 80% of the winged insects, gone forever. 50% of the vital phytoplankton responsible for the mass migration that happens every 24 hours, taking the CO2 out of our atmosphere and putting it down to our ocean bed. So we know that the endocrine disrupting chemicals, the phthalates, the dioxins in plastic are dangerous for us. We are already witnessing a 53% reduction in male fertility. We are finding plastics in placenta in unborn babies' brains. And of course, when we recycle plastic, these chemicals do not disappear. Instead, they compound up, losing all possible traceability and responsibility for their impact. But it's not just the chemical toxicity we need to be concerned about. There are two kinds of toxicity: the toxicity of chemicals, but also the toxicity of shape. Many of us will remember the crisis of asbestos, and probably we think that asbestos is a toxic material to us, a chemical that is harmful. But no, asbestos is not toxic in that way. It's the shape of asbestos, its sharpness that embeds into our lungs that causes the damage. And in the same way, the micro and nanoplastics that accumulate in our bodies, near our hearts, in our arteries, in our lungs, in our brains, and other vital organs, that is the toxicity of shape that we also need to be aware of. I leave you with this one question: is human health and the toxicity of plastic the Achilles heel of the plastics industry that will be heeded by the negotiators and lead us to a robust, effective treaty? Will we protect the profits of the fossil fuel industry, or will we protect the health of future generations? Time will tell, and history will surely judge us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sean. Our next speaker is Alex Grabowski with WWF, who also has been an advisor to this process and providing us with great amount of insight, wisdom, and knowledge. Alex, are you there?
I'm here. Thanks so much, Marta. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So jumping right in on this, WF has always advocated for comprehensive and criteria-based approaches when it comes to materials and packaging decisions. And we think that the treaty is really a critical opportunity to drive harmonization and create alignment around this topic. So on the topic of substitution and alternative materials specifically, which is a very important solution set, it's also a very complex solution set. And we've always taken the position that it's really important to make these shifts in a deliberate and thoughtful manner in order to maximize the benefits to people and nature and minimize the trade-offs. And I say minimize, not eliminate, because all materials have impact. The truth is that there's nothing that is perfect with no impact. And so we do need to make thoughtful choices, and we do need to consider the concept of continuous improvement over time. So the harmonized health and safety criteria and the assessment pathway are a really great starting framework to build off of in pursuit of these goals. And I do really hope that as the treaty process progresses and intersessional work is called for, that we'll have the opportunity to build on these criteria, including aligning on practical tools and methods, including LCA and beyond LCA, so that these can really be applied in a way that is practical and can achieve real real world results. I'll call back to John's point earlier about, perfect being the enemy of the good. I know he was talking about chemistries, but I'll say that that also applies to things like product design, material sourcing, and other things that are very highly influential of what we actually see as performance in the real world as far as both human and environmental outcomes when we make these kinds of choices. So, in my opinion, the most impactful consideration going forward in the treaty around alternatives is this call for a harmonized and science-based assessment method, which is why I really also hope that the treaty creates the must-have foundations around global bans and phase-outs of the most harmful and problematic materials, binding design requirements, aligned financial flows, and mechanisms to strengthen over time, which is critical for an overall successful framework for action and would create the right space for us to continue down this path of improving upon the framework that OPLN has already started and making it possible to really apply this in practice. So I do think that having space to strengthen these provisions over time and a mandate to do so around alternative materials is key for this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And we're going to move to our next speaker. And that's Laurent Milay-Canal with UNA. Hi, Laurent. Are you there?
Thanks. Hi, Marta. All good. And good evening. Yes, good day, everybody. So thanks. I think complementing a bit what Alex was saying, I mean, a few things that I would like to highlight. So first, I mean, indeed, the list of criteria that we see is really comprehensive. And I mean, obviously, we're trying to assess a lot, and being comprehensive is really good. And particularly if we manage to do this in a harmonized way. At the same time, the comprehensiveness that we see at the moment also questions or provides a bit of question marks in terms of the practicality and how implementable it will be. You were mentioning it as well. I mean, the data that will be required for this. So I think one key word that I would try and highlight is to be parsimonious and try to avoid overlaps between the indicators. So I think at the moment, by wanting to ensure that everything is covered, there might be some indicators there that perhaps are already covered or covering each other. So I think that would be one key element to consider. And then also to try and bring a bit more clarity on how the approach could be implemented. I think it's also important. We want this criteria-based approach. Who is going to apply it? Are we hoping that every country will have to be applying this, or is this something that would guide, for instance, a scientific body? I think maybe a bit more clarity on that would also kind of clarify a bit what, who would need to be accessing this data, how often do we have to do these assessments, etc. In terms of how we're using the criteria, again, I think I would want to highlight something that is really positive in the framework that is being proposed here, that we're talking about the application to products and systems. We hear a lot about materials, but let's remember, I think we cannot assess and compare materials to each other. It's about how we're using these materials as well, and indeed how these materials, I mean, where are they being used? So what are the local conditions? And that's also highlighted. That's really positive. But again, when we're assessing products and systems, let's not reinvent the wheel. We know a lot about life cycle assessment. Harmonization is improving a lot in life cycle assessment. And indeed, of course, insisting life cycle assessment is not perfect. It doesn't do everything. So doing the LCA and beyond, as Alex was saying, I think, LCA plus, whatever we want to say, but we already have a lot there. And there is also a lot of harmonization that is happening. So just a couple of weeks ago, there was the launch of the first global life cycle impact assessment method, where a lot of the impact categories that we're talking here have been massively advanced. I think it's very useful to have the safety and go through the safety first, filter through the safety, and then assess the sustainability, where also toxicity can be assessed, but already among the things that are safe, there's still a toxicity, and we can still kind of compare options based on that. So I think on that, I might also just highlight or kind of in terms of the LCA, indeed, we hear, and I think, Martha, you also highlighted it's important. Yes, there has been also cases there's a lot of cases of misuse of LCA. Let's not kill the tool. It's the way that the tool has been used as well. So I think this treaty provides also the opportunity to provide much more guidelines. What are the safeguards? What are the product category rules that need to be used? We have already a lot of experience from there, and looking into how this tool needs to be used and how we should avoid that it's being used. I think that's where we can advance a lot, and in that sense as well. Again, there's quite a lot of work going on. Just next week, we're also launching a policymakers guide to LCA, which we hope will also help increase the awareness of how LCA can be useful, and at the same time, how you have to be aware of LCA when it's being misused, and which in many cases is actually not LCA. I hope that clarifies, and yeah, these are the main points I wanted to discuss, but hopefully we can still have a bit more questions to answer later. Thanks.
Amazing, Laurent. And yes, I agree that data can make the tools excellent or even perfect, or maybe one or the other, and either of those would be just great. And with that note, we'll move to our next advisor, Rhodes Ibsen, with BPI. Rhodes, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Yes. All right.
So yeah, thank you for having me and being able to share some perspectives. The Biodegradable Products Institute champions a transition to the circular bioeconomy by advancing policy, standards, research, and the systematic science-based verification of compostability and biodegradability. So hopefully that gives you a general sense of what we were bringing to the discussions as an advisor. Looking at the negotiators' brief, it clearly includes safety and sustainability criteria for both plastics and alternatives. And one of the things that we're really keen to look at is how during INC-5, which criteria will be applied for all materials versus which are the distinguishing factors for alternatives like a compostable or biodegradable biopolymer. For instance, all materials need to be safe, as we've talked about, regardless of whether they are traditional plastics or alternatives. Lack of safety can't be negotiable. However, when it comes to certain sustainability criteria and the ability for a material or a product to be circulated in the biosphere, these criteria are applicable to alternatives to traditional plastics like biodegradable biopolymers. This is important when we consider the ability of a treaty to shift from a place of restrictions on traditional plastics to one of incentives for the investment in and an adoption of alternative materials like compostable biopolymers. It's also important when we consider how the treaty may be able to avoid being overly prescriptive on topics, whereas we've talked a lot about there are current data limitations. And it's really exciting to hear about all of the work around LCAs, because that would be one of my primary examples of concern. We want that systematic ability to use science to verify the safety and harmonized criteria. So with that, BPI will be going to our first INC, and we'll be really excited to be highlighting and advocating the role of the circular bioeconomy in reshaping how plastics are produced and used, and communicating our connection to BPI's mission and vision, a world without organic waste, where we feel that materials like food scraps and food waste and the associated packaging can be a resource and an input for the circular economy.
Thank you, Rhodes, and I'm glad to hear the alignment on safety first. It seems to be a rule that applies in many different scenarios in life. And on that note, we're going to go with Tricia Furley next, who's going to have a deeper presentation covering the HSC review, but also on the non-paper draft insights that has emerged, I think, 2 weeks ago now. So I'm going to hand over to Tricia to share some of her thoughts.
Thanks, Marta. Do you have my presentation there, or do you want me to? I could just speak to it off the cuff. That's all good. Thanks. Next slide. I'll go straight to the next one. It's all good. Marta's already introduced what I'll be talking about. Thanks for this. I just want to say first, it's been an absolute pleasure working with Marta, particularly, and Rachel more recently, to provide independent scientific review on the process of the HSC. And I just, as the previous speakers have said too, or alluded to, this is the kind of starting point we're looking for, we're needing, I think, in developing the kind of multi-disciplinary, multi-stakeholder body, independent body, but also with other expertise included in there to establish a set of criteria needed as reflected in this workspace. So it's been wonderful. There's been a lot of, obviously lots of different points of view. I think it's quite a heroic effort on behalf of OPLN to ensure that all those voices are heard. And that's been synthesized in the work thus far. There's been some very, very interesting conversations, complex conversations. So I just wanted to start off with a presentation, just sort of a slide, just sort of talking about some of the benefits, just to emphasize the benefits of these criteria. I'm very, very pleased to be seeing a real emphasis on health and safety in ways that we haven't perhaps seen so much before in other circles where we've been talking about the treaty negotiations. So one of the things that this harmonized safety and sustainability criteria brings to the table is that it enables the development of those much needed harmonized standards, but also definitions. I'll talk about terminology in a moment. And of course, indicators, assays and so on, as we've heard, for comprehensive and holistic safety and sustainability assessments across the full life cycle of plastics. And this again is where the definition of full life cycle of plastics will be incredibly important, both for this set of criteria and also for the treaty itself. It also provides a sound basis for effective monitoring, reporting and compliance measures that will be essential for any effective responses on both a national and a global scale. It prompts incentives and investments in responses at the top of the waste hierarchy. And we're pleased, and I'm saying, when I say we, I mean the Scientist Coalition's independent science body is really happy to see that there's been more of an emphasis on those responses at the top of the waste hierarchy, and there are plenty of those responses available before recycling, for example, so that's now more present in this current form. It protects against regrettable alternatives and substitutes, drives a just transition away from hazardous and unsustainable plastics, and offers guidance towards a safe, and I want to just pause for a moment on the safe, reflecting on Sian's presentation, on Professor Warner's presentation and others, and Alex's contributions about the importance of safety. Laurent also mentioned the importance of health here in LCAs too. This is incredibly important. Really leading with human environmental health here, I think will provide a really a future-proof, safe set of criteria for all of us. And so a safe, regenerative and restorative circular economy is needed. And I'm glad also to see material agnostic is mentioned here and emphasised, because that's something that we really needing to push for. One of the things I would mention here is that probably needs more of is just general overall reduction in the plastics released to market, regardless of safety, sustainability. Real plastic production reduction goals is part of this as well, because that will also deal with what we're with the effects of the release of those products into the market. Can I just go to the next slide? Thank you. Because I've been asked to speak to the essential use concept and approach, and how this could be implemented, its value, including to just transition in this criteria and for the criteria of the future Global Plastics Treaty. So just reflecting on the presentation we gave in the last plenary, but sort of building on that in terms of implementation, there is a possible application we feel would be quite powerful and realistic, could be to apply the essential use primarily to exemptions for listings of the most hazardous and unsustainable plastics in the annex of the future treaty. And those, of course, those lists in the annex of the future treaty will be very have to be very carefully determined, again, potentially from an independent body of experts, which we also want to emphasise here too. Perhaps that needs a little bit more of an emphasis in the criteria that how are we going to get here. We can really only get here if we have a trusted body of experts with a conflict of interest declaration to ensure that there's no vested interests that are sort of, I guess, determining the direction of the outcomes based on perhaps a commercial interest, and we want to avoid that as much as possible, or at least a transparent process for an independent body. So that body could determine the listings of groupings of plastics in the annex of the future treaty. Those listings in the annex of the treaty could be based on those products already assessed as the most hazardous and unsustainable in other multilateral environmental agreements. And also we have lists of products from parties, potential parties to this treaty. They've sent through lists of products that domestically they've already regulated as either non-essential or avoidable, or as problematic in the sense that they're hazardous, they're unsafe and unsustainable. And so those products could be prioritised in the annex, listings, groupings of products in the annex of the treaty. Now, this is where the essential use concept kicks in. Already they could have kicked in determining those listings. But then when those listings are established and in the annex, parties could apply for exemptions to those hazardous and unsustainable groupings of plastics by claiming essential use. And that, again, would need to be very, very carefully assessed by an independent body. And the essential use argument for those exemptions would be based on pre-existing application of essential use. And that is that the use is necessary at this time for the health or safety of society, or is critical for the functioning of society, and that there are no safe and sustainable alternatives, substitutes, and if we're taking a material agnostic approach, systems and services currently available. Now, if those parties who applied for exemptions to the lists of the annex of the treaty based on the essential use approach, they would need very strict time-bound exemptions. And then they would also, if we're going with just transition, that would need to trigger technical capacity building and financial supports under the subsidiary bodies of the treaty to enable a timely phase out of those essential currently, but certainly hazardous and unsustainable products that need to be supported to move those out as quickly as possible. So this is where the just transition comes in. And this is where this is where we are applying essential use to enable everybody is able to transition away from hazardous and unsustainable plastics. So I'll leave that there for a moment, but very happy to discuss that further at in the Q&A. If we move on to the next slide, however. And I want to talk about some of the keys to the success of the harmonised safety and sustainability criteria, and of course to the treaty. And here I'm kind of combining our scientist coalition responses to the 3NP is the third iteration of the chair's non-paper, so that's the 3NP here, and also combining it with our responses to the current iteration of the harmonised criteria, OPLN's harmonised criteria. So again, we're going to be needing a panel of independent experts with no conflicts of interest, and that needs to be transparent. And it would need to apply the essential use criteria, harmonised definitions and monitoring reporting. The panel members must disclose conflict of interest and that their work is transparent, underpinned by the following environmental principles of law: precaution, the precautionary principle, prevention principle, and polluter pays. And we can see a couple of those appearing now in the latest iteration of the current criteria that we're talking about today. Harmonised definitions and consistency in terminology, which is not necessarily quite where it needs to be at this point, to make sure that we're all speaking from the same book and referring to the same terms in the same way. It's great to see some definitions appearing here, but there's still a little bit of inconsistencies across terminology, both in the HSC and in the third iteration of the non-paper. References to chemicals of concern. What we're noting in both of these documents is we're referring in some places as to be used in plastics, but it would be more inclusive and safer to refer to those present in plastics, because that would also include any non-intentionally introduced chemicals of concern into products through the full life cycle of plastics. There have been some references to availability of sorting and waste management in the HSC. And this doesn't necessarily mean that those services and technologies are safe and sustainable. And we're proposing here that whilst it's outside the purview of this piece of work, there will also need to be safety, sustainability and transparency criteria applied to waste management too, to make sure that whatever's happening at the end, regardless of how it's been designed at the front end for waste management, that waste management as well as removal and remediation also needs to be safe, sustainable and transparent. Financial capacity and technical support, again, are crucial if all of these wonderful ideas from these great minds are going to be applied in a successful manner. So we're going to need that science policy interface or the expert group that's independent, but we're also going to need supporting resources. And I've just referred to the essential use criteria and how that can be applied for exemptions. So that financial capacity and technical support will be needed throughout, particularly for developing countries, and certainly if essential use is going to be applied in that manner to ensure, again, that unsafe and unsustainable products are phased out as quickly as possible. Now, there was just a mention before about risk, and I completely agree that we absolutely need to front end this and to start and to prioritise a hazard-based approach, and that's certainly the position of the Scientists Coalition. But throughout the phase-outs of those most unsafe and unsustainable plastics, and an example being for the transition period for exemptions, there also needs to be a very careful reporting that those parties are mitigating risks as they're using those most dangerous products, as they're phasing them out. And so that's where monitoring and reporting are going to be very important. And that brings me to another point: transparency. We can't have a successful treaty with the criteria that we need unless we have data disclosure, unless we have disclosure of the important data we need to determine safety, sustainability. And then we start talking about the need for transparency in terms of labelling for all supply chain actors. And that will also enable us to monitor and report effectively in terms of tracking and tracing and reporting back to the COP on the success of the implementation of the treaty. Finally, two more main points here, really, led by human health, as I've mentioned, but also human rights. And it's really good to see human rights emphasised in the HSC. It certainly still needs strengthening in the chair's third non-paper, and also alignment with and building on existing multilateral environmental agreements where those are weak. I would just say too that whilst we have, as we know, global standards across the board that we're already we're applying, there needs to be a lot of work done here. So not only alignment with and building on existing MEAs, but also improving upon existing global standards so that we're covering the full life cycle of plastics and protecting people and planet. I'm just going to go very quickly through two more slides because I don't want to take up too much more time. I won't go blow by blow through the 3NP or the third non-paper. So I just want to speak briefly to the third non-paper and just give a bit of an overview. This creates a valuable point of departure for negotiations. It provides a starting point for member states to build on and strengthen their obligations so that the treaty will be effective and fit for purpose. And the purpose being the ending plastic pollutions, that is the mandate. We provided, as a scientist coalition, some feedback on this as a whole. And so what we're seeing is that a key concern is that many of the articles are written with quite weak language, but we also recognise, again, this is only intended as a starting point for parties to build upon, but we wouldn't want to preempt the kind of weak language that we would want to see in the final draft, the final treaty text. So an important full life cycle standalone provision would be needed. Science and modelling indicate again that reduction in primary plastic production is really essential for the success of the treaty, but that's really missing. As is reference again to the waste hierarchy guided by prevention, precautionary and polluter pays principles. In addition, the science shows us that criteria, standards and assessments, phase outs and regulation of plastic chemicals and polymers of concern, products, plastic alternatives and substitutes, then the support of technology systems and services, intentional and non-intentionally added micro nanoplastics, and non-intentionally substances throughout the full life cycle of plastics are urgently needed. But we note that in this third non-paper, there are no provisions for criteria and lists, as we've talked about here already, and this is the work that we're doing, at least around the criteria. And we don't see any assessment and development for those, nor are there any explicit standalone provisions for a science policy interface. There's a little bit of text there suggesting it, but we really need a strong provision for that or a similar body in that in any treaty draft. This is not a draft treaty text, but it is a non-paper suggesting guiding document for parties. The non-paper doesn't sufficiently capture the need for harmonized definitions, assessment criteria and standards that will be needed to establish those lists of groups of plastics, including plastic chemicals and products of concern in the annex of the treaty. Further controls on the global trade of plastics and criteria and harmonized standards of transparency, tracking, tracing, and so on need to be included. Product design provisions do not include the full life cycle of plastics. And there's a number of other points of note, which I won't go into here, and I think I've spoken enough. However, one of the things that we do need to work on, I think, in the 3NP and also in the harmonized system, the criteria that we're working on here, is around the consistencies in terminology and making sure that those are consistently used throughout. Thanks very much for the time. And as I say, thank you very much, the team. It's been a pleasure working with you up until this point. Looking forward to future work with you.
Thank you so much, Tricia. And on that note, we're going to be moving straight to the panel discussions. If you have questions right now to Tricia and of the advisors, please use the chat at the moment while we have the panel discussion. We're going to try to see if there's any more time left at the end for an in-person questionnaire exchanges. But we're going to move forward with our multi-stakeholder perspectives today. So we have with us Caroline DeLoc with Atlantic Packaging. Caroline, are you here? Let's see.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hi, we also have Marcus Erickson with us, who is a researcher at Five Gyres, and Derek Atkinson with Total Carbon Energies, as well as Preeti Tyagi with Mars. Hi, everyone. We're going to try to spotlight you, and I'm going to get started with Caroline today. So Caroline, let's begin with you. So Atlantic Packaging, as we have mentioned, organized that kickoff session earlier this summer. So we've got over 40 organizations to collaborate on the foundational framework for HSCs. And we know that you are partnering with various sustainability packaging solutions. Could you share from your perspective some of the existing key science-based indicators that you're guys considering and the very clear knowledge gaps that you might be encountering in that process?
Yeah, sure. So as some people see being like a packaging distributor is kind of like a dirty word in the sense that it's just like buying and selling packaging, right? But I think a lot of what we do that's a little bit different is we're trying to source what is kind of the latest and greatest in sustainable packaging options that we can be offering to our customers. But I think that our journey trying to evaluate the sustainability and safety of those is probably very similar to those of a lot of companies on this call, or customers that some of y'all have been working with, partners. Understandably, we often just kind of started with the basics of the end of life pathway, like asking the question, is it recyclable? Is it compostable? Relying on verification of compostability from groups like BPI. But I should also mention that we were also trying to understand, when we were thinking about whether it made sense to move to a different kind of substrate, does this use as little packaging as possible? Like, how can we make sure that we're not getting into a situation where we are using much, much more material just for the sake of switching substrates. And so that was always weighing on us too. And then as things have matured, as many of you have mentioned, we're often asked by customers to do comparative LCAs, but as many folks have touched on here, this is far from a perfect tool. And so the knowledge gap, or one of those big knowledge gaps, to answer your question, is just a lack of understanding about what LCAs can and can't do for you. They're models. They're not decision makers in and of themselves. But so as we've been, trying to get more nuanced about the environmental impacts, as well as social and safety impacts of the kinds of packaging that we're looking for as we vet new suppliers, LCAs have been an available but imperfect tool to do that. And then as things have matured even further from a previous conversation of just like, well, should we use paper or should we use plastic, which is a very like two-dimensional way to be thinking about the options that are available to us, particularly in like the flexible film space. A lot of us are looking at these unique alternative materials that are coming from a variety of feedstocks, some of which are even waste products in and of themselves. So we've been needing to ask more detailed questions about the sustainability of each feedstock. And that's where things tend to get a lot more qualitative than quantitative, which can be really frustrating. So I think that those kinds of questions that we've been needing to ask just demonstrate the necessity of establishing criteria like this, because we're needing to weigh all of these things together. And those were just the environmental sustainability pieces. We have not really yet been asked by our customers to be evaluating the like human health toxicity impacts, but I don't think that's because they're not aware that that conversation is coming. I think that they're just not entirely sure what to ask for. So going ahead and getting ready to be ready to answer the question about, where does this substrate rank in terms of human or ecosystem health impacts? And we know that that is coming. So we know that there are some things we're doing where we can look at existing test standards, but lots of other places where we're having to assess things very qualitatively, and that can be really frustrating, especially when we go back to our customer and the answer to whether something is sustainable, of course, is like, it depends.
Thank you so much, Caroline, and thank you for highlighting as well the safety component on where it currently stands from your experience. It's really good to have some of that reality check for how that actually goes in some of the existing scenarios out there. And with that, we're gonna bring our next speaker, Derek Atkinson. Derek, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi, good to see you. So Derek, I have some questions for you. So Derek is with Total Carbon Energy, who is a producer and manufacturer and distributor of something called polylactic acids, PLA. So can you explain us a little bit more about what it is and also how you guys have been able, or so far, to prove your superiority in comparison with conventional plastics? Like, what data points are you guys actually using to argument that?
Okay, thanks for the question. Thanks for having me. I think there's some things to realize, and I think there's been a little bit of a background. We need a very scientific approach. So it's very easy to make a knee-jerk reaction. Plastics are bad, let's ban them. Plastics are very different. Some plastics are bad, some plastics are not bad. Chemicals, people say they add chemicals to plastic, phthalates, whatever it is. You only add a phthalate to a plastic if you want to do something. Not all plastics need it. There's lots of plastics that don't have them. So to condemn all plastics because one plastic has phthalates added is not good. The same goes for microplastics and nanoplastics. Oh, people say, oh, this is really bad, really bad. Yeah, some are bad, but some are not bad. The bad ones are the ones that are persistent. You can have non-persistent materials. So if you can, PLA is a plastic that comes from sugar or from corn. We ferment the sugar into lactic acid, and that lactic acid is then polymerized into PLA. And that PLA, at the end of its life, will go back to lactic acid. Lactic acid is generally regarded as a safe product. You can put as much in your body as you like. There's no limit. The FDA puts no limit on how much lactic acid you can put in your body. Is PLA safe? PLA is used in sutures, in implants, in bodies. It is resorbed by the body. Is that inherently toxic? Of course, it's not inherently toxic, or it would never exist in the body. And if you can imagine an implant, you've got a screw or something, and it's maybe an inch long or half an inch long. It's got a certain mass. After it's resorbed, it's nothing. It's gone. It's completely gone to lactic acid. That lactic acid has gone into the body. It's been absorbed by the cells. It's been used as an energy source. It no longer exists. But the screw has gone from a large part to nothing. It went through a microplastic stage. It went through nanoplastic stage. Those nanoplastics and microplastics were not safe. It is not. You have a microplastic. It is not inherently unsafe. It is only inherently unsafe if it is persistent. Non-persistent materials are not necessarily dangerous. And I think we need to be careful that we don't put everything together and say, oh, nanoplastics are bad, let's ban all plastics, because all plastics at some stage will go to a nanoplastic. Yeah, it's used in the body. I think it's safe.
I got you. I mean, I understand. And like, I think we have articulate that the persistency has to be analyzed first before, everything else among the safety criteria. So like, I totally understand where you're coming from. But so a little bit more about PLA. So I know that you guys also have utilized LCA assessments already. So I've read some of your existing reports into the environmental footprint of PLA that's produced at scale in Thailand right now. So can you tell me from your perspective, like how do you use this kind of assessment? How does it help you? And maybe is there something else you need, or you feel like you can use the existing LCA to argument all your points, which you have just did in many ways? But
using the LCA allows us to demonstrate the environmental benefit of the product that we make. We use other tools such as Bonsucro for the sustainable production of sugar. So there's a certification scheme for sugar to show there's no slavery and all those sorts of things. But a number of processes, because they are, if you like, green or made from biomass, doesn't necessarily make them sustainable from an LCA perspective. So from us, it's really important to say, okay, what is the carbon footprint of the process that we're doing? And it's also important that we start from growing the sugar and we go through the whole process. So there's energy involved in that. Obviously, the sunlight coming in and the growing, but you need to process it. You've got the sugar mill. You've got all sorts of processes of purification of the sugar. We've got what we do to it. So we ferment it, and you ferment it, and the product you make is 90% water and 10% lactic acid. You need to get rid of the water. So there's a lot of energy required to do that, and it comes in and we get an environmental an LCA, and that's when it leaves our product. We also look at beyond that, but there is no fixed end of life for PLA. It can be recycled, it can be mechanically recycled, chemically recycled, it can be composted, it can be landfilled, and all those impact the overall LCA from the cradle to the grave. We look at that, but obviously the bit that we can influence is the bit to which we can sell it. We have been investing a lot of money in a new process to make lactic acid. So lactic acid is one of the biggest producers of CO2 in our process. So we have about half a pound of CO2 per pound of product that we make, which is about 4 or 5 times less than conventional polymers, but still it's a positive amount. The new process that's just been started up in Thailand actually takes that to negative level. So they managed to develop a way of producing the lactic acid with a much lower input of energy. We're also using 100% renewable energy for the energy that we do use. And that's taking us to a negative carbon footprint. So we're completely redoing our LCA. The criterion by which you do the LCA has changed since we did the last one. So we're using the latest methodology to come up with our LCA. We'll have our revised LCA in place in the new year, which we expect to show maybe 400 to 500 or 0.5 of a pound of CO2 negative per pound of product that we produce. So in the new year, when we got the whole process up, we'll have something that is beneficial to the environment, and every pound we make will be it'll be beneficial, as that will remove carbon dioxide from the system.
Well, Derek, thank you so much, because I think it's really useful for everybody to hear practical examples of how people are actually experiencing this issue when we're introducing a new product or an existing product that's introduced at scale. It's really helpful. So thank you for sharing this with us today. And we'll be moving to our next panelist today, and that will be Marcus Erickson with 5 Dryers. Hi, Marcus.
Hi, Marta. How are you? Thanks for inviting me to this webinar. I wanted to share, I was invited to share this recent paper just came out. The title is Plastic Pollution Exacerbates the Impacts of All Planetary Boundaries. So I want to talk a bit about what planetary boundaries are. It's kind of some of the results of this paper. It's important that we talk about, the full impact of plastics across all these different Earth systems. Over the years, we've heard, people talk about, and actually, if you could pull up that first image of the planetary boundaries. Yeah, that one. We often hear, different research articles come out that plastics impact climate change, or plastics in the atmosphere have impacts there, or the pH of the oceans, or the impact, of microplastic, nanoplastics on biota, or in soils. We hear a lot of these papers, they come in, and it gets us to think about, other impacts besides just, kind of how this really started, these ocean surfaces. But trying to understand a context for how to think about these ecosystem-wide impacts on these Earth systems. And that's where the planetary boundaries really pays off. Because then you can think about, you can look at each of these nodes, and there are 9 different boundaries. How is our plastic pollution impact each of these 9? And how do you measure it? And how can we not just measure it at a snapshot, but monitor over time? But then also, what is in each of these boundaries when you get to a point where you've exited the safe operating space? For example, if we look at ocean acidification, does microplastic, nanoplastics impact the pH of the oceans? And at which point do we say one particle of microplastic is acceptable? We wouldn't say that, but at which point is it detrimental and pushing that boundary? I want to focus, though, on one of these boundaries here, the novel entities, because that's where plastics kind of fit. And there's been a lot of work on this, and I want to acknowledge again, Patricia Villarrubia. She was the lead author on this paper, looking at how microplastics might impact all of these 9 planetary boundaries. And this work comes out of the Stockholm Resilience Center, going back to, I think, 2009 was one of the first, or one of the earliest papers that got us all thinking about this. And Patty really took a deep dive on this for a dissertation. Looking at novel entities, that's where we categorize microplastics and nanoplastics, and the macro as well. And we had determined that the amount of plastic pollution in the world today, in all of the different compartments, and when I say compartments, I mean like ocean surface, ocean floor, the atmosphere, on land, in all these compartments combined, that plastic has pushed that planetary boundary out of the safe operating space. Now, it gets really challenging. As you get into the details, you realize that how you measure, how you set that criteria for when you exit that safe operating space is challenging. And this is what, Patty and the team, other co-authors have done on this paper, is looked at each of these different planetary boundaries and where plastic impacts would lie. So you can show that next image. I only have 2 images. One is to find the 9, and the other is looking at how novel entities, plastics, are impacting each of these 9. And again, the takeaway in the short 3 minutes I have I think we should all really think about this as a great framework, a way to talk about these ecosystem-wide impacts. Because again, we hear about stories of plastic and climate change, plastic and biodiversity, plastic and the pH of our oceans. This is a great framework to have that conversation. It also leads to, the seriousness, because we're not just talking about the ocean surface anymore. We all know that, but this is a great framework. So the challenge is, what is the measuring stick for when we're out of that safe operating space? We're still working on that, but I want to really focus here on the paper. The results of this paper just released last week is that the novel entities, that one planetary boundary is affecting all of the others. And you can see here, and I did send a link in the chat to this paper where you can really look at, you can see this image. It's a nice image to use in your presentations as well to show how plastic pollution impacts all other planetary boundaries. So again, that measuring stick, those indicators, it's challenging, but I'll share with you what we determined in this paper. Number one is that if we can measure plastics in the environment in all compartments, that gives us kind of a measuring stick, a good indicator for when we're pushing the boundary. And that is not just ocean surface, it's the seafloor, it's the atmosphere, it's terrestrial environment, it's in soil. Those are different compartments. So again, I mentioned compartments again. That's one way for us to monitor and measure the amount of these novel entities in this planetary boundary. Another is to look at not just how much is in each compartment, but the transport between compartments. Like one great way to monitor if we're pushing a planetary boundary is how much plastic pollution is leaving our terrestrial aquatic systems, lakes and rivers, and bays and estuaries, and making its way into the ocean compartment. And there are other different pathways between compartments. It's a spot where we can monitor. And the other is plastic production. There was a really wonderful paper that was published by Wynne Cowger and others, the last INC-4, about linking plastic production to pollution. There's currently a correlation there, relationship between the two. That's another way to sort of measure how well we're doing with novel entities, whether we're pushing that safe operating space. Another is looking at the percent of plastic products and chemicals without oversight in our life cycles. So there's a lot of chemistry that's additives to plastics that we do not have a really good handle on how much exists in society, exists in products, and what their end game is. Another measure is the number of species observed to ingest and retain plastics. What is the impact, documented, demonstrated impact on other living things? And the other is the breadth of the impact on other planetary boundaries. And that's, again, what this paper did. And so you can see that plastic pollution, it's impacting all other boundaries in serious ways. The degree of seriousness is we need to continue to do research. We need to understand, okay, we might have microplastics in the atmosphere, but does it cause harm? There's a paper that I just recently found that indicated that, imagine this, like a small microfiber in the atmosphere can provide a nucleus for condensation of water droplets and therefore exacerbate rain events. How significant is that worldwide? It was one study done in Japan on Mount Fuji, but we need more studies like that. But I don't want to hinder the seriousness of this by saying we need more data. Not at all. We know enough to address this issue, but this framework is very important and powerful for us to use to talk about the breadth of impacts on a global scale. I want to leave you with a couple things. Just to keep planetary boundaries on your radar. They help us to argue why we need strong policy and a private sector response to plastic pollution problem. And last is a quote from the paper that Patty wrote in the conclusion that the world societies should be striving to minimize exposures to planetary boundary threats through reduction of plastic production, reduction of its use, and release. And on that, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Marcus. And if you have any questions to Marcus, please reach out to him directly, and we'll be getting right to our last but not least panelists today, Pretty Taggy with Mars. Hi, Pretty.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Thank you so much today. And I do have a question for you. So from your perspective, like from Mars's perspective as well, also, what science-based indicator does your team use to evaluate, but also like disqualify alternatives? Because I'm sure you are approached by, a lot of new solutions out there, and same as, conventional plastics. Like, how do you look at that these days?
Of course. So first of all, I think I would be very quick and short because we are way over time. So like at Mars, we are actively looking, of course, for alternatives to plastic, especially where we see less potential of recycling, like smaller packs in the high leakage markets. So we are investing like hundreds of millions of dollars actually to reimagine and redesign our packaging nowadays. So today, almost half of our packaging portfolio is undergoing, like this redesign or elimination 100%. For example, if you have seen this, like example in Australia that we have, like for 2 chocolate bars, we have completely moved from plastic to 100% paper. And like as a success story so far, like I can give a number. Like we have redesigned around 60% of our consumer-facing packaging that exclude actually the transport or the tertiary components to be reusable and like recyclable or compostable. And now, like going back to your question specifically, like whether we use science-based or non-science-based, like how do we select these like alternatives? So when looking for any alternative materials to the currently used plastic that we use in our packaging portfolio, we make ensure, like of course, that we are not getting involved in another like plastic deception or like hoax, like we are not using something that will create the same problem in 100 years from now. So when bringing new material to the business, we have a setup of very clear laid out plans of screening the material. And the plan varies region to region based on what are the capabilities of them, whether they have really good like industrial composting facility, really good like recycling facilities, things like that. And so like just giving an example, for example, if you are replacing a specific material in a very high leakage market, like in developing countries, India, China, or African countries, then we are not just settling with the industrial compostable materials, because a lot of people are like, there are a lot of materials out there which are claimed to be industrial compostable. But in that region, since they do not have even the industrial composting facilities, so we are more into looking for the biodegradable materials that causes no harms to the environment, even if they are littered. Of course, like we do not want that people should litter our packaging, but just in case if they get littered, so we are mainly looking for the biodegradable materials. And at Mars, we have named it biobenign materials. We call them biobenign because they should not harm any any microorganisms, or like they should not cause any safety or like health issues, things like that. And so like of course like we have to so to get there we have this screening like material screening method, like what material would be go or no go, like very strict list of the materials based on the regulations and evidenced by like all the scientific studies. And at the same time, we are also preferring only home compostable materials, which is more related to the biodegradable in the environment than the industrial compostable materials. So yeah, and I consider this very bold step of Mars because I see very few focusing on like these like home compostable materials and not just the like industrial compostable materials. So yeah. So this is what Mars thinks and Mars is going ahead with.
Thank you, Pretty, for giving us this understanding on industrial in-home composting. It's been an issue that has been brought forward to us on multiple occasions. So thank you so much for that. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're officially 15 minutes over time, so it's not fashionable anymore. It's time to close this meeting. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, everyone. Appreciate it. See you in Busan, many of you.